Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. Need to see if that makes a difference. I unplugged my phone. Um, okay, you can see my car. Hopefully you guys can see me. So this live stream is going to be about basically your common issues on your 6-liter Powerstroke that need to be machined, areas that need to be addressed on the engine if you're tearing it down. I might touch on 6.4 a little bit. 6.4 is just, it's a bastard engine to me. I don't recommend a 6.4 to anybody. Anybody that needs a truck reliably to run and can be fixed in a reasonable amount of time. A 6.0, you have to go in depth to fix a lot of those things, but it's usually a lot of the same stuff. And the 6.4 is the same way, but the 6.4, the easiest way to work on them is to pull the cab. I know it can be done. I've had to do a high pressure pump before in cab many times in cab. You got to pull the turbo out. Yeah, I can pull the turbos pretty quick. But when it comes down to it, the 6.4s, every time you dug into them, you found so much crap wrong that you were always ordering parts to add to the job because you're there, you might as well replace the parts. It'd be dumb not to. So that's it. Just I've got a very bad taste in my mouth from the 6.4, and I completely understand. There's people that had no issues with them. I get it, but I worked on too many of them, and I have a bad taste. You'd think it'd be that way with a 6.0, but once you get people's maintenance in order with the 6.0 and everything, you could keep a 6.0 running a long time with no issues. Okay, so what are some areas of the 6.0 that need to be addressed with machining? Well, we all know cylinder heads. Cylinder heads are number one. The big thing years ago was to have them machined no matter what. Nobody checked them for cracks, or very few places did, or they weren't finding many cracks, and they would put them back on and still have head gasket failures, or what they thought was head gasket failures, and it was actually big enough cracks that would leak coolant or pressure into the cooling system. And so now, before I even do anything, have anybody do anything with the cylinder heads or my machine shop, I drop them off and say, just check them for cracks. If there's no cracks, then we'll evaluate the head from there and see if it needs to be machined, and then O-ring it if we can. My machine shop is a stickler on what's it called? Valve protrusion. You think it's the amount of distance the valve is sticking past the head. It's actually how far the face of the valve sits from the surface of the cylinder head, and that's a very important spec, because if it's cut down too close, well, now you're pushing it closer to the piston, and so when that push rod, the cam comes around, pushes the push rod up, then the rocker arm pushes the valve open, now your valve is closer to the piston, and in that case could experience contact with the piston. So that's a very important thing. A lot of places don't do that. I'm not gonna say a lot of, but there are places that don't do it. They machine the heck out of it, and there's some places that shops that don't want to do that. They don't care. They want the head machine. They don't want they want to try to do it as cheap as possible for the customer, and I don't see it that way. You fall back on how to explain it. Basically experience long term. You take information from people long term that have been doing this for years. Well, machine shops you go to, you talk to anybody, they always check for cracks. Well, then cylinder heads got better over the years, and people just didn't expect them to crack or have cracks, or if they're under a certain size, it wasn't a big deal. And in these engines, we already have issues with cracks, with warping, with with head gasket failure, why do you want to go in more than once? I understand it's a money issue sometimes, but if that's the case, I don't know. I asked to borrow some money from somebody, or just you're going to have to accept that you're putting something together that could fail again. But so we definitely want to get the cylinder heads checked for cracks. Make sure, if there are cracks, there's some companies that will repair them, some that won't. I've had good luck with a company that did. I only did it a couple times. The customer wanted to go that route, and so they've had good luck with it. Other than the cylinder heads, valve seals. Are valve seals an issue on these? I've not seen any. I'm not saying that they're not. Some of these trucks will burn some oil. High mileage. Could it be rings and seals? Could be a combination. But on most boosted applications, from my experience, you don't have the valve seal issue as much. What else? I've not seen any warp blocks. My block that I'm using right now, that I'm not using right now, but it's sitting on my engine stand that I need to build for my truck. And if you guys see any of my posts over the past year or two, I was slowly acquiring parts for that, and I made a video on getting the crank balanced, and that block actually froze and popped two freeze plugs right below the deck of the block in the back. So you can see them if you're looking from the back of the engine, in the truck. It's the freeze plugs you can see just under the cylinder heads, between the transmission and the cylinder head on the block. It popped both of those out, and I was replacing that engine for a guy, and it had sat over winter, and so I ended up getting that block. And so sent it in, and I told them flat out, I said, hey, I measured this stuff, some of this stuff, it looks pretty good, but this block froze. Can you check it to make sure we're not warped or anything like that? We don't have anything shifted. And they went over it, checked it, said everything looks great. So we continued with machine work, and that engine had, I think, around 250,000 on it, and it still had crosshatch. I think I remember showing you guys some of that, and I can't remember if it was that engine or that first engine I built, but they were similar. They looked very similar, and condition wise, it still had crosshatching. In that case, this block, I knew I wanted to push a lot of power, so I wanted to make sure everything was great. I ended up having them check the bore on all the cylinders. They checked cam, crank, and the deck for warpage, and didn't find anything on that one. Since I'm doing a lot of power, I decided to have it power hone, and so they bolt forgot how thick it is, but they want the studs that I'm going to use, and so they bolt down what they're simulating a cylinder head, and it's a big block that's got holes in it for each cylinder, and they torque it down, and then they run their machine in it, not to bore it. They run a hone with stones on it, and they run it up and down the cylinders, and they power hone it. That way they are giving it a better sealing surface, and also having those torque plates on there that allows that to simulate the cylinder head, because when you torque a cylinder head down, it can make the block shift and move. So that basically makes sure that you're honing much better. If I remember correctly, they do that also for boring. That way they bore and make sure they're boring as straight as possible. So I decided to have that done. Do you all need that done? If you still have cross hatching in your cylinders, and you measure the cylinders and they are within spec, I don't believe you need it. That's just my opinion. I've put together so many engines, basically done a refresh on an engine. You'll go in it, you'll tear it down, you don't find any heavy bearing wear, you don't find heavy piston or cylinder wall wear, and you'll tear it down and you'll go, and you may have gotten it, say, out of a junkyard or something, or somebody says they want to freshen their engine up, and you'll say, well, let's, friends, usually I do it for friends. Rarely do I do it for customers, because those are just lengthy jobs that don't usually end up paying that good, because people think refreshing is going to be cheaper, but it actually would be cheaper to go a reman in that case sometimes. But anyway, so you'll tear the engine down, inspect everything. If the crank looks good, no wear, you can't catch your fingernail on anything on the crank. The cam looks good, cam or cams. Everything that you measure is within spec. Why do you need to do anything? Just put new bearings in it. Put new rings on the pistons. Clean it up. You may run a hone in the cylinders just to scrape it up, but I've been told by engineers whenever I was working at Ford that I've seen bent rods, piston rings break, and they'll say, inspect the bore and let us know what you find. If there's heavy gouging from, say, a broken ring, then yeah, we need to maybe, Ford didn't like sending things out to the machine shop very rarely. They would have rather done a short block a lot of times. So if there's heavy gouging from a piston ring, making a groove that couldn't be sealed, if you could catch your fingernail on it real easy, a lot of times they'd do that. But if there was no damage to that cylinder wall and they said they're still cross-hatching, pop new rings in it and go. And you go, well, that can't be right, can it? Well, you put it together and the thing has great compression, runs great, no issues. Why not? So, if this engine you're refreshing ran good before, and all you're doing is wanting to do new gasket, bearings, rings to freshen it up, why not? Why not? It just blows me away. Like, I look on, I'm sure you guys do the same thing. You get on Facebook Powerstroke groups or other, and anytime anybody tears into the engine, they think they have to get it to the machine shop and have it bored. Gotta have it bored. Why? Normally boring cylinders, from what I've always been told, is you're trying to fix a problem in the cylinder that was there, or you're putting a bigger piston in it to increase the displacement of the engine. So we'll go back to number one. What would you need to fix? Well, let's go back to the story I just told about piston rings. If you have a heavy groove in that cylinder, your machinist might measure it and go, well, I think we can go 20 over, and I think we can get rid of that. And I think, this engine is within range. We can do 20 thousandths, or 20 over. I think it's 20 thousandths, but we can do 20 over and get rid of that. The engine won't experience any overheating, or it won't cause any structural weakness, because there are some engines that should not be bored, or if they are, they should only maybe go about 10 or 20, and anything more than that would be excessive. So you have that, or you have some engines can wear over time, and when the piston comes down and rocks, when that rod shifts as the crank's coming around, if it gets stiff wrist pins and everything, it'll shift that piston in the bore, and basically it'll make on either side of the cylinder wall, it'll start wearing the piston in on both sides. So you'll get a think of it kind of like an hourglass shape. So you'll come down to the base of the cylinder, and it'll actually be wider down at the bottom. than at the top, because you're getting that shift. And that's very common with a lot of engines. But if if it's excessive and out of spec, then you may need to bore the cylinder to do that. What else? If you have any, say you have a piston that got melted and it's left aluminum on the cylinder walls, well, then you're going to need to, sometimes that aluminum can basically weld into the steel or impregnate the steel, and they may need to bore to actually give a new finish for that. And so those are reasons in my head why you should bore an engine. If you have cross-hatching, if you are within spec, you could almost just run the same rings again. But to me, that's almost, I look at that as a wear item, and I look at that like a bearing or a gasket. If you've got high mileage on it, you're that far into it and you're wanting to freshen it up, a set of rings isn't bad. It's a good idea. What next? We spent a long time on that. I spent a long time because people, for some reason, think that the cylinder has to be, anytime you tear an engine down, people think it has to go to the machine shop, has to get hot tanked, has to have the cylinder bores, has to have this board, has to have that board, and it's just ridiculous. You may have just made something way more expensive than it needed to be. If you've basically got a stock rebuild, just, if it's not broke, don't fix. Just replace the wear items and roll on. What else? I can't think of the cranks on the 6.0s have always been really strong. Would Dunbar motive, but I'd want the rings, bearing. Come on. Oh, come on. I don't know how to work this thing. Live chat. Let's see. Okay. I'd want the rings, bearings replaced, cheap insurance. Yeah, I agree. Sounds doable. Replace the stuff if you're down that far. I mean, if you're tearing into it for a problem and you don't find anything wrong with bearings, all your clearances are good, well, and say it's a relatively new engine, you can torque things back up and roll on. There's no reason. But I don't know. Some people think that if you take it apart, it's got to be replaced or it's got to have this done. The cranks on these engines are extremely strong. My crank, I started looking into getting a stronger crank because the engine I'm building the rods can withstand, I think, over 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. And so, way over that, 1,000 horsepower. So torque could be double. Torque could be 2,000. I got, at the time that I was buying everything, that I thought I was going to be building that engine a lot faster, I couldn't get the middle of the road rods. And at the time they were like, yeah, we might be a year out. And I'm like, oh my God. So I got the Waggler competition rods. And those things are basically designed for sled pulling trucks. So yeah, those shouldn't ever give me a problem. I could basically throw probably 100 pounds of boost at it and it'd pop something else, and that rod would probably just break the piston. So no, I don't know if that's true, but that's kind of what I'm understanding from what I've seen. So, or from what I'm reading and everything. Crank's strong. I couldn't find, I think there's an aftermarket company that makes one, but I didn't need a billet crank. I'm not doing sled pulling. I'm not doing max effort. So we're not doing that. I don't need a billet block. Front covers on these. I have seen, so these will cavitate behind the, okay, good question, nitrate. That's very common on diesels, but let me get back to that. Well, no, this front cover would basically be the nitrate. Or cavitating is normally what I've always been explained it to, or is described or told that that's what it's called, is cavitating. cavitating, from what I was always taught, is diesel engines create a vibration that causes tiny bubbles in the cooling system. And normally the most prone area on diesel engines was right at the top of the cylinder wall on the coolant passage, and the bubbles would eat at the metal. And over time, basically they could eat through, and you would get coolant or combustion then into the cylinder walls. You could get coolant into the cylinder, on the intake stroke, and then you could get compression in the cooling system on combustion. That was always caused by a lack of maintenance. Usually coolant was a very big thing in the diesel engine. You had to take care of it. You had to make sure that it's in good shape. I'd recommend actually anybody, if you're doing coolant changes, to kind of save yourself some money, check on, there's several companies. I know I was looking the other day at one, I'm just going to say it's Amsoil. I'm not saying definitely go with Amsoil, but I know on their website they sell test strips you can check your coolant with, and just to save you some money. There's no point in always changing out your coolant. That's a lot of coolant, and with money the way it is, if all you have to do is buy test strips and they'll work on basically any coolant, why not? So okay, explain cavitation. Yeah, that's what I was always explaining cavitation as. But test strips, it's just easy. I don't have any. I need to get some. I want to, just because that's an easy way to tell if your coolant's in bad shape. I know they have those testers that you can test to see if the freeze point is good, but in my opinion, that doesn't always work very well. But that's, coolant is a big part of a diesel engine. On these 6.0s, a big area was the front cover. As the 6.4, where behind the water pump, it would cavitate and eat holes in the front cover. It being aluminum is softer, and it could cavitate a lot easier. And then it could push coolant into the crankcase. So then you would be filling basically it would go down to the oil pan. You'd be filling your oil with coolant, and you wouldn't know where your coolant leak is. You wouldn't have anything outside. It'd be filling your engine up. I've taken a lot of water pumps off and seen where somebody you can tell basically they've welded up and built up the area where it's like a dish where the water pump impeller, if you take one of these off, you'll notice the water pump impellers have kind of a concave or whatever. The center comes out further and the fins kind of go back at an angle. And the front cover is designed for that water pump to go in there and fit just right. That way there's some basically a clearance between there, and it can create turbulence and move the coolant. And I've seen plenty of factory brand new water or front covers, and then I'd see the ones that you could tell somebody's built up and they've put it in a machine or something, lathe, and actually create. I'm getting a phone call. My wife was calling me. She was just getting off work. So the front covers were a big thing. Aluminum's usually the first thing to go in cavitation. That is the first area. Where's other areas? I know cavitating. Can't eat at the radiator because it's aluminum. I'm trying to think. I can't think of anything else that's an area on these that would need to be machined. I don't know. Maybe you guys have some ideas. I can't think of anything at all. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to go over was pricing on machine work. And I have my receipt from when I had my, I had my block there at the machine shop, and I had my crank. I had everything there to be balanced. One thing I did have done that you could have done is I've personally seen these engines get out of time, and um, they will actually, I think there's, no, yes, okay, sorry. The 6.0, if it's out of time, if I remember correctly, it will cause weird starting issues. Sometimes it won't start, sometimes it will start, things like that. And the way I've always understood it was always the what's called the tone ring, or the pickup wheel for the crank sensor. It can shift over time, and it's not as common as it used to be. I think Ford or International may have come out with a fix for it, but I think it was even after. I think the 6.4 was in production at that time, because I saw a ton of those on 6.4. That was oh god, that was a nightmare. You'd have to do a cam and crank, use an oscilloscope to do a cam and crank readout, and look to see if your cam and crank were not in sync. That was, oh god, that wasn't fun. Then try to explain to a customer that they need a new engine. That didn't always go over well. So what I had the machine shop do is, since those tone rings can shift, and then it doesn't, it's not happy. Sometimes it'll start, sometimes it won't, sometimes it'll cause running rough issues. I had them put TIG weld spots on, to basically tack to the ring to the crank. That way it doesn't shift. Hopefully I plug in. Let me know if you guys can't hear me. I charge. Can't hear anything at 8:17. What the hell? I'm just going to hit things on my phone. Oh. Okay. Okay, back. Okay, what was I talking about? Did I just start going over the... Well, you don't know. What was I talking about right as you lost me? I know that I said, let me know if you can't hear, and then I proceeded to talk for several minutes. Do you guys kind of remember what I was talking about? Don't know. Okay, I'm going to start back over because I can't remember exactly what I was talking about, and nobody's chiming in to let me know. I'm going to go over the prices of, back over some of the prices of the machine work whenever I had my block and my crank. If you guys remember that crank video of me actually having my crank balance at the machine shop at PMI, I'm going to go over some of the costs, and some of the costs may be different because this is the date when I dropped it all off was July of 21. Oh, I was talking about cam sync. Okay, yeah. So I was talking about having the tone ring tacked to the crank, because it's been known for those tone rings, or the crank pickup wheel. What's the other? There's all kinds of words for them. I've always called them tone rings. So they're known to shift on all kinds of engines, because a lot of times all it is pressed onto the crank, and so they expect basically a what is that? Machine fit or press fit to hold over time. Well, from that crank, when it spins, it doesn't just freely spin easy. There is vibration to it. You know, those pistons and rods are pushing against the crank in different ways. So from that vibration, you can get a lot of weird things to happen. And I've seen on 6.4s more, but I have seen a couple 6.0s that actually got out of time and caused long crank or no start issues, and basically because it was having trouble picking up correctly. What happened probably was it maybe shifted and warped some, and so as it was coming around, it wasn't a straight line. One side of it may cross here right in the center, and the next one may cross over here. Well, that's not a perfect pickup for that sensor. That sensor wants dead on every time, and it wants to see the teeth. So having your tone ring tacked is not a bad idea. To have mine tacked was $45. It's pretty cheap. It's there. Have it done. I have seen some that are pinned now to where that tone ring can't shift and the pin's in place. So that's not a bad idea either. If you take it, I wouldn't recommend, like, I could have TIG welded it myself probably and not had an issue, but my big thing is I didn't want to throw off the balance, and I wanted the machine shop to do that. They were already going to balance the crank, so kind of the thing to do. But a lot of good machine shops know where they can put tacks and not cause any issue to the crank balance. Let's see. Oh, I had the where'd it go? Oh, I had the pistons delip. That's another place you can have machined. So on the piston, on the cup, on the inside where the injector sprays, when it goes down, if you run your finger up to the top, there's a lip, and it kind of comes out like that. And I had that removed because they're known to, under high power situations, build up a lot of heat there, and they can either start melting there, or then it's a pressure point and causes a crack in the piston. So I had that delipped on mine, which I actually change, what's it called? What is the word I'm looking for? Change the displacement, the compression ratio slightly. And so I'd like to fill it up with some water and compare the volume to a stock piston, which I have some stock pistons I could probably do that with. To have the pistons delipped was $270. $270 is not bad, considering one piston for a 6.0 is usually around $250 with rings and the wrist pin. So if I would have bought, say, delip pistons from somebody else, that would have been what? $255, about $2,000 for a set of pistons. So $270 to have mine delipped isn't bad. And I measured them, and they measured them and said that they were good. So there's no reason you can't reuse some of these parts if you measure and check them out, and they're good. I had the cylinders power honed. I was talking about that earlier. That was $195. The block's already there. That's just, it's not boring. It's power honing. All you're doing is creating a better surface for those rings to bite and make a good seal. And that's what you're doing. I had, let's see, they checked the line bore and checked the crank line bore and the cam line bore. The crank was $65 to do. The cam was $55 to do. That's not a bad price. Check deck flatness, it's $40. I mean, it's kind of, somebody would say, well, what? I shouldn't. If you're doing all this other stuff, can't you just throw it in? Well, their time's money. They got to make money, and they're doing a service for you. So, if people can't make money, they can't survive, can't keep the doors open. And the little things, sometimes you go, man, that costs a lot for that, but that's where you're kind of make your money. And the big things you don't always make great money on. So you make good money on the littler things a lot of times. They dusted the block and checked for cracks. I had no cracks. That was $48. Checked the cylinders for wear. That was $30. Balance the crank assembly with accessories. So since I was adding I forgot what brand pulley I have or dampener. It's not a fluid dampener. ATI, I believe it is what I got. I got an ATI balancer and a Suncoast flex plate. Since I was doing that and I was putting new rods on, it was a good idea to have my crank balance. The rods are probably within spec, but since I was adding that much, changing that much to me just worried me a little bit. I didn't want to put everything together and I'd be, a little too much weight, have some vibration, try to spin this thing. I don't want to spin really over stock, but try to spin this thing and make more power. And I shake the engine to death. The amount of time I'm putting into it, $300 was awfully cheap. It's the same thing I said on last live stream about O-ringing the cylinder heads. It's about $200 a cylinder head to have it O-ring. Why not do it? It's just, I don't know. It just makes no sense to me why people don't want to do it. I think that's about it. Anything else? I didn't see anything else on here. I didn't have head work done. I wish I would know that, but I don't. I haven't had head work done for some time because normally I have them check it out and they charge me. I drop so many off to them, they charge me $50 to $75 to check it out and check for cracks. on 2 cylinder heads, and I think it's in that price. Maybe it might be 100. I don't know. So I'll have them check them out, and a lot of times they're cracked, so then I have to source cylinder heads. They can source. I've sat down with them 100 times. They don't. I've talked to PMI. They're not comfortable with repairing cracks in cylinder heads. The owner he goes, it's just not an area he's always been successful at, and he doesn't want to take a chance. He doesn't want to see somebody's engine get ruined, and I completely understand that. I mean, I'd rather somebody be honest and say they don't want to take a chance at that, and deliver on all kinds of other services they offer, rather than taking a chance and ruin an engine. I mean, he's right. I mean, it can be done wrong, or you think you get it done right, and it doesn't get done correctly. So he doesn't want to take a chance. But again, it's normally around $200 a cylinder head to have your cylinder head O-ringed. So it's just a cheap thing to do. I don't know. I don't see anything else here that's really. The other stuff was just cleaning, removing parts. I didn't remove any of the cam bearings, so they removed them. They removed cam bearings, 5 of them. Removed the freeze plugs. In that time, they had $90 in labor on that. I could have done it, saved myself $90, but you know what? I don't. I like PMI. I like doing business with other companies. I don't mind spending some money. I'll save money where I can on other things, but at that time, it was just kind of. I know they're doing me right. I know it. So, what else here? Where did I order? How many bearings? I was just going through a list of the stuff. I'll touch on. Let's see if anybody said anything and I missed it. Oh, okay. I will touch on the things on 6.4. 6.4, what did I see a lot of issues on 6.4? 6.4 rocker arms. Those are horrible. But you didn't machine those, you replaced them. 6.0 and 6.4 have cam lobe issues. You can get that issue sometimes. Actually the 6.4 I saw more lifters fail and would cause issues there, but I think that probably had a little bit to do with the oiling of the valve train period. You don't really have to have any machine work then. You might have to have a cam follower bore fixed, but I know they can. I don't know the price on that. That's kind of an odd one to have done. Gas. Well, before I go further on the 6.4, gasket sets too. Molly, you can get. Reusing camshafts. Yeah, I've missed. Nope. Ed, I'll touch on that here in a second. Molly, they have a complete engine gasket set. I think at O'Reilly, I saw for the 18 millimeter dowel was around $620. You got to figure whatever your tax is in your area, because tax on $690 may be another $100 or so. I think, isn't that right? Something like that. So you may have $700 in gaskets to basically put the engine back together. So you need to figure gaskets on top of that. Ford, you cannot get a kit like that of gaskets. That is the one pain I've tried talking to people in Ford on that. I'd go, why don't you guys offer kits on this? And they didn't want to. I don't know. Okay. Okay, so I'll touch on the camshaft, and then I'll talk about what may cause the lifter lobe, or the cam lobe failure. And I think it's basically, what was it? Dunbar Automotive. I think you're hitting on everything. I can't see anything else being a problem, but reusing a cam, again, a cam is just like a crank. It, as long as it measures out good and looks in good shape, the cam bearings look good, I see no reason why you can't reuse the cam. It's to me, it's just like a piston, just like a rod. It's a hard part of the engine. As long as it looks good, measures out correctly, on the cam lobes, you can measure or on the bearing journal, if that measures correctly, I see no reason. And then the cam lobes, some manufacturers will actually a lot of them will give specifications. You can measure the cam lobe in certain areas to know if that cam is within spec. And a lot of times I'll look at it, and you can usually look at a cam and tell it's worn, just because it won't have a smooth feeling to it anymore. Usually it'll be porous looking. You can tell something's worn into it. You can, maybe when you drag your nail across it, it's got some friction you can feel. It's not real smooth. The 6.0s, I've always noticed that there's these little lines in the cam lobes. You can really see them on the tips. And I think, my opinion, I think it is the machining process or heating process between the cam followers and the cam lobe that then over time create those lines. Somebody could probably tell me exactly what it is, but I just think it has to do with that. And usually if I see those lines on it and everything's smooth, it's good to go. Cam gear to cam. It's hard for me to believe, but I've heard of those shifting as well. I think they're pinned, but I think they can still shift some. And so it wouldn't be a bad idea to possibly have that tacked. I'm installing a new cam in my engine. I think it's a stage 2 Cali cam. And now that I say that, I can't really remember if it is or isn't. But I need to find out. But I plan on tack welding my cam gear to my cam. That way I know it's good shape. Lifter failure in the 6.0. I've truly not seen as much cam failure, lifter failure on a 6.0 as I have the 6.4. A lot of people say that the length of the push rod was creating too much strain on the cam follower and the rocker arm, and that would then put too much pressure on the cam follower and would cause the cam follower and cam lobe to wear out prematurely. In the dealer, we saw a lot of failure. I saw a lot of trucks with very high mileage on them. In my area, I saw a lot of 6.0s. I saw a lot of Powerstrokes. That's all I worked on. Not all, but 90% of what I did was Powerstroke. And I didn't see that many cam lobe failures. As many as people say are out there. It may have been that people were maintaining their engines better where I was at. Though I talked to friends that lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and they'd work at Broadway Ford, which is a big truck dealership, and they were right off I-70, and it was, I remember my buddy was telling me all kinds of, they saw stuff that I'd never seen. It's just, I don't know. It's, whether it be abuse or maintenance, I don't know. Some are saying that the ramp on the OE cam is harsh on the valve strip. I've heard of people saying that. I don't know. I've seen a lot of engines run several 100,000 miles and not having issues. So I don't know. I'm going to lean towards oil quality is your biggest issue, is the biggest issue. And the reason I feel this way is I've had a few customers of mine in the past 2 years that always wanted to cut it cheap on oil changes, and they'd try to push their oil changes like 7,500 miles without testing. They just do it because they're like, well, they're just so expensive. And I'm like, well, I'm telling you, it's just not a good idea. And they've worn their oil out, and then they get cheap oil, and it just doesn't work out for them. And they started having premature injector failure, just failures out of nowhere. They'd have excessive stiction. They'd wear out their O-rings in their injectors, like the O-ring where the nipple from the oil rail goes into the injector. Both of these guys would wear those out like crazy. It never made sense to me. And I eventually I'm like, what are you doing oil change wise? And they'd go, oh, I'm getting 1540. And I'm like, are you getting diesel 1540? Well, I asked for 1540. I tell them what truck I have, and I'm like, it doesn't mean you're getting oil for a diesel that's 15W40. And now I'd say most 1540s are most likely at the specification that they're supposed to be at to basically, not all of them you have to double check, but a lot of them are much better than they used to be. When the 6.0 came, no, this started in the 7.3, if I remember correctly, when hydraulic injection, Huey injectors came out. Not all diesel oil had an anti-foaming agent. And early on, we had to always, if we had weird drivability issues, most of the time we saw this issue after running on the highway. It would just start running rough, and you just couldn't figure out, everything checked out good. They might have junk oil in it that's foaming up and causing basically air pockets in the high pressure oil system. And so I think most companies now have anti-foaming agents built in, and so it helps out a lot of that. I think it's oil. I think it's oil and filter. The Napa Gold filter was junk. I saw so many of those. It's unreal. How do you like your filter kit system? Filter. You talking about on the EcoBoost? I just severed cam and lifter on 2 lobes, more on mine, 230,000. Ed Hansen, were you the original owner? I'm not trying to point fingers, but I'd like to know if you were the original owner. 230,000, yeah, is low, and that sucks that you had lifter failure at that point. But no, you weren't. So you really don't know the maintenance life. Another thing that was always addressed to me about the 6.0 that Ford would really push to the technicians was education. Educate your customer, educate your customer, educate your customer. Well, I couldn't always do the greatest, and service writers suck. They get paid more than technician, and they have to know nothing at all. They would never educate the customer. They would never explain to the customer why something failed. I always liked to... I'm a nerd where I dig into stuff. You guys can tell. It was owned by a municipality, then a farmer. Yeah. Sadly, the municipality probably used the cheapest oil they could, and the farmer probably went too long on oil changes. Maybe not. There's a lot of farmers that take really good care of stuff. But cities, I'd almost rather buy from a private company than the city. They're always cutting corners. What was I talking about? Oil. I'm talking about oil. Oh. So educating your customer. The So Ford would always stress that we need to educate our customer. And when they put the 6.0 out in 2003, the Super Duty already had the 7.3. And in 2003, you had the option of the 7.3 and the 6.0 at one point. The 7.3 was a very similar engine to the 6-liter. And they thought they had educated their customer very well on it. But what they didn't realize is the average 7.3 owner didn't always change their oil on time and didn't always change their fuel filters on time. And so since they weren't keeping up on their oil changes, they might have some injector failure, but those are much larger injectors, and I feel like they could take some abuse and keep on running a lot better, but they weren't as accurate as the 6-liter injector. So now you have an engine that can go longer on oil change and be kind of abused a little bit more, and it didn't have issues. And then also the fuel filter side of it, I don't know how many times I got 7.3s in with loss of power, and you'd get them in, and this is a common thing, people still do it to this day, is when's the last time you changed a fuel filter? I don't know. Well, we have low fuel pressure. We probably need to start there. Change a fuel filter, boom, we've got an extra 10 PSI, changes everything in the world. 10 to 20 PSI changes everything in the world on a 7.3. And so you have basically all you do is change a filter or do a maintenance item, and boom, you had power back, you had, the drivability, it starts better, it runs better. Well, the 6.0, people would run a long time on the fuel filters, and the fuel filters definitely need to be changed on the 6.0 at 10 to 15,000 miles. And if you didn't do it, you starved your engine of fuel, which then hurt the injectors and caused all kinds of problems. Well, now you've got an engine that makes way more power than the 7.3. And so you have oil that's going to break down a lot faster. Let me read this real quick. What do you say? External oil coolers. Just a second. I'll touch on that here in a second. So you have oil that breaks down because it is not only lubricating the engine and helping cool the engine, but you're also lubricating the injectors and running the injectors. So your oil's doing double duty. Your normal engines, like a gas engine or a 6.7 Powerstroke or a Cummins or a Duramax, your primary job for the oil is to lubricate the engine and to help maintain the temperature. I mean, really, you maintain the oil temperature, that way it then doesn't overheat as well. But if you can maintain the oil temperature, help maintain the temperature overall of the engine. Oh, my wife's home. She's blinding me. So on a 6-liter and a 7.3, you have double duty on the oil. So I hate going over on oil changes unless you have facts to back up going longer on an oil change. If you're testing your oil and getting it and sending it off, and they're telling you go another 1,500, 2,000 miles, and retest, you're great, then awesome. Do that, but don't just willingly do that. I don't know. It's just, injectors are way too expensive, and a diesel engine's way too expensive to do that. I don't agree with that. My battery, I'm about 10% life. Okay, external oil coolers, I truthfully don't, but the bulletproof diesel and the IPR external oil cooler that you can use, the 6.7 Powerstroke oil cooler. My wife's staring at me, and power's on. I'm pointing. I think that you can use the 6.7 Powerstroke oil cooler. I think that's the coolest thing. I saw a price today. I think it was IPR was $1,400 for the kit, and bulletproof is around $1,800, $1,900. IPR kit is much more simple, it looks like, but there's something about the bulletproof that I like, and I think I'm gonna go personally. I think I'm gonna go with the bulletproof. I've got actually, hopefully in about a month, I'm gonna update you guys on something I've got, and that will get a that's going along with my King Ranch, and it's going to get an external oil cooler. So I'm all for that. To me, the oil coolers on these engines are maintenance items. And if you can cut that down from roughly an 8-hour job down to an hour because it's a maintenance item, why not? I mean, and the 6.7 cooler may actually be a better cooler. I don't see those clogged near like the 6.0. So I think those are a better cooler, period. And so if you can stick those on, get at it. Ed, how did you find metal flakes in your fuel? I've only seen that on a 6.4 and a 6.7. Basically anything with a actual high pressure fuel system, not oil. Unless you're getting metallic from like a fuel pump, the pump on the frame rail internally. I'd say if you have low fuel pressure and you've got good regulator, good fuel filters, and you don't have any leaks between the tank and the pump, then you possibly have a pump out if you're seeing metal flakes in it. But back to the oil affecting it. I think that oil is the biggest culprit on failure on the camshaft. That's just my opinion. I've seen too many engines that they don't put the right oil in. They use a Napa Gold filter. And if you guys have not seen pictures of a 6-liter, a Motorcraft cap and oil filter next to a Napa Gold, some of them are correct. Some are not. Maybe it's not just Napa Gold. Maybe there's an aftermarket company that's making junk. But what you want to compare is where the O-ring, where it seats against the filter base, to the bottom of the oil filter. And the larger cap design is almost always shorter. And so basically you're not going to, what happens, the reason this is such a big deal is there's a little button, a check valve that filter pushes on. When it pushes on that button, when you tighten that filter down, it allows a majority of the oil that comes up to that oil filter to get filtered by that oil filter, then go back to the engine. If it's not pushing on that valve, oil comes up into that housing and can drain straight back down to the oil pan. So what then happens to that? Oil that's not being filtered goes back to the pan, gets sucked up by the oil pump, and run back into the engine. It's just, you're just pumping your junk back. It's like, I could say something nasty, but I'm not going to. But it's just, you're eating crap. Why would you let your engine eat crap? Oil is the lifeblood of every engine. People ask me all the time, they go, what can I do to make my engine last longer? What's a good thing? I said, get your oil change done on a regular basis. Don't go by the oil monitor on your car. Thankfully, 6.0s didn't have that, but I almost wish they did, and you could set it for 5,000. But my F-150, I always do 5,000. It's just that easy. It's just, that was the common mileage in 2013 whenever I bought that for the average oil change to go. And so go 5,000 miles, change your oil. And that thing, I've got 120,000 on it. It's great. If I tear into the engine and look at stuff, it's always in great shape. Some older cars, I do 3,000. Some people, I say, pick 5,000 and go with an oil change. Just do that every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, and you will have very few problems. Because usually if you're keeping up on oil changes, you're going to keep up on other things as well. How hard is it to put rocker arm on? That is a pain in the ass. On these engines to do, I've done that. God, I've done that in cab before. And there's a specific tool that what is it? It put, how did that work? You had to pull the head bolt out and put this tool in, and if I remember correctly, it would, and you had to make sure the piston was down. Yeah, so you had to, what you had to do is it would push the valves open. You had to make sure the piston was down. It would push the valves open. It would relieve stress on the rocker. And then you unbolted the rocker and put a new rocker arm on. And then you'd have to get one new head bolt. After you put the new rocker arm on and remove the tool, you'd have to torque the head bolt back in there. I'll have to say that is probably one of the dumbest parts of an engine I've ever seen. That's why then the 6.4, they changed to ones that can actually unbolt. But the 6.4, I'm not going to go there. Chicken plant oil change, 20,000 miles. What? Around Freddy, what is chicken plant oil change? I don't know what that is. Anyway, we are pushing an hour, almost an hour and 10 minutes. I know some of that was messed up. I know we got a late start, and I really apologize for that. I had to meet for one of my customers that I do. He's got a car collection. I had to meet a glass guy because the glass guy was nobody else would do it, but I got a hold of a guy I knew to do a windshield and the back glass in the 71 Porsche. I had to meet him there at the shop to have it put in. And so we pushed a little, that took longer than we thought. And so that's why I was running behind, and then also came home. There's no power, so you guys couldn't see me. Had to feed all the animals and everything. Got a big old black German Shepherd that he likes his food. Real quick, truck is used for the plant. Yeah, 20,000 is not good. I don't care if that's horrible. That's horrible. Yeah, they need to change oil more often. So, okay. Leave me some comments. I really appreciate any questions, anything. Shoot me some questions. If you guys want me to touch on another subject, shoot me some comments to let me know. I really appreciate everybody getting on here and chiming in, asking questions. I really enjoy doing this. This is almost better than actually making videos because I don't have to edit anything. Next time, hopefully I'm in the shop. I can actually use props and show some stuff. That would be cool. I should have another video out pretty soon. I'm working on it. It's on, actually the car I'm driving right now is a 2013 Chevy Malibu, and it was on that. I know it's not diesel, but it's actually pretty cool what I was able to figure out on it. I think you guys will enjoy that. And what else? I don't have another video figured out, but I'm trying to figure out. Anyway, I won't bore you. The Ace All Trades, you're welcome. I appreciate you guys getting on here. What is the reason for rocker arm clips are broken? I can sit here. I can talk forever. I'm a talker. I don't know if I always make sense, but I talk. The rocker arm clips, the way I was explained by Ford engineers, was the clips were only really there for manufacturing. They somewhat hold sometimes if you have an engine sitting over time and the lifters bleed off, they help a little bit. But I've torn a lot of engine, gone in to do a lot of injectors, and clips are broken, and there's no issues, and the rocker arm's in good shape. I mean, truthfully, if you start having valve issue, like rocker arm issue or something, I'd almost rather see that rocker arm pop off, because then you'd have less of a chance of pushing that valve into the piston. That's just my opinion. Older rocker arms had a metal retainer, and eventually they got rid of that metal retainer and they went to a plastic. I believe, and that's what I was told by an engineer. It doesn't mean it's correct. I've been told wrong information before, but being the fact that I've seen many rocker arms work perfectly without the plastic clip, I don't see an issue. Now, if I'm going to have an engine apart and I'm ordering parts and I can get replacement plastic clips for a very reasonable price and pop them on there and everything's good, yeah, well, I'm going to do that because it's going to help me out when reassembling. I'm not going to take a chance of losing that ball underneath. So, okay, again, shoot me some questions on comments. Keep them coming. I really enjoy doing this for you guys, and I can tell you guys are enjoying it, and I think so. There's only 8 people, but hey, I'd probably continue this even if there was 0. So thank you very much, and I'm going to try to start doing probably this once a week. If the demand gets more, then we may bump it up from there, but I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, guys. See you later.